Welcome everyone. In this video and the next two, we're going to be discussing turf grass. It's a very important subject. We get a lot of questions, a lot of phone calls about turf grass. Seems like everybody has some kind of problems with their lawn. Either it's not growing well or they have weeds they want to control. So it's a pretty big, important area that we're going to discuss in depth. Some of the common turf grass types that grow well here in Hernando County that you'll see quite often: Bahia grass, that's a very commonly used turf grass here in the county. Bermuda grass you don't see anywhere near as often in residential lawns. It's used extensively, of course, at golf courses and in a few lawns. St. Augustine grass, we have quite a bit of that in the area. Zoysia grass, we have very, very little. Zoysia became popular several years ago. Everybody thought it was the perfect grass, had no problems, grew just great, but it didn't turn out to be quite as easy to grow as people thought. So many people who had zoysia for a while have returned to St. Augustine, although we still have a few lawns out there in zoysia. And centipede grass, you'll rarely see here in Hernando County. It's very popular north of here, up in the Panhandle, up in North Florida, but doesn't grow very well, and you don't see too often in this part of the state. So Bahia grass is very commonly grown in the area, makes a fine lawn. Basically, Bahia grass to St. Augustine grass are the number one and number two lawn types in Hernando County. Every type of turf grass has good points and bad points. There is no perfect turf grass. So some of the advantages of Bahia lawn: it's very drought tolerant. It will take an extended period of no water and start to look very tan, very brown, looks terrible. But as soon as it starts to rain, it'll perk back up and grow again. Very low fertilizer requirements, pretty easy maintenance, very few pests, also very few diseases. There's essentially no diseases that you would normally see in a Bahia lawn, and you can start it from seed. Some of the disadvantages is it has a very open growth habit, which encourages weeds to move in. Leaves a lot of empty space for weeds to sprout and spread. Has very coarse stems that can be difficult to mow. They tend to make lawnmower blades dull very quickly. Poor wear tolerance. Not the kind of lawn where you want to be driving a car, parking heavy equipment, having a large number of children playing on it. It's not going to last very long in those situations. It sends up seed heads, which many people find very unattractive. The seeds are viable, so the more seed heads your Bahia lawn sends up, when you cut them off, you're constantly adding a few more seeds to the lawn to help thicken it up. And it's not very tolerant of very high pH, low iron, salt, or mole crickets. As a matter of fact, the recommended pH for a Bahia lawn is about 5.5, which is fairly acidic. So for anybody who has a high pH, a Bahia lawn is not going to perform very well. There's a couple different popular varieties of Bahia. Pensacola has a slightly finer blade and is cold tolerant. Argentina has a wider blade. It's not cold tolerant, and it sends up much more seed heads. So generally Pensacola is going to be the preferred variety for home lawns because of fewer seed heads being produced. Bermuda grass, like I mentioned, is very rarely used for a home lawn, but it can be. I have a few neighbors that have Bermuda grass lawns. Some of the advantages of Bermuda grass is it's very vigorous, has a wide range of soils that it'll grow well in and climate, wears very well, very drought and salt tolerant, and establishes rapidly. It tends to spread very quickly. Some of the disadvantages is it can have problems with nematodes, problems with thatch buildup, very poor shade tolerance, and it can also be very aggressive, so it's going to grow very aggressively into potentially flower beds in areas where you don't want the grass to go. Some of the different varieties: common Bermuda grass is generally considered to be a weed. In fact, most neighborhoods that allow Bermuda to be grown in the neighborhood say that common Bermuda cannot be grown. But there are several other types that you can get either seed or sod for: Celebration and a couple other different varieties. St. Augustine grass, very, very popular type of turf for homeowner use, used extensively in Hernando County. all nicer subdivisions. Some of them actually require that St. Augustine grass be grown. But it too has its good points and its bad points. It says that it has the best shade tolerance of warm season grasses, but keep in mind there is no turf grass that is going to thrive and do really well in heavy shade. A little bit of shade or slight shade, it may do fairly well in, but it's not really going to thrive and look great. St. Augustine has good salt tolerance, establishes quickly from sod, which is the way that it's normally put down, and adapted to a wide variety of Florida soils and pHs. It's pretty forgiving of either low pH or high pH. Some of the disadvantages are it requires supplemental irrigation during dry weather. You can't allow it to get really, really bone dry, otherwise it will die and it will probably not come back. So it is pretty demanding with its water. Some of the dwarf cultivars are going to be more disease susceptible. You really don't run across the different cultivars that often. It does have problems with chinch bugs and certain types of fungi that we're going to get into more in the upcoming videos. And it too has poor wear tolerance. So you wouldn't want to be parking vehicles on it or having a large number of children playing on it all the time. That's really going to take its toll on a St. Augustine lawn. Some of the different varieties of St. Augustine, probably the number one and most commonly grown one is Floritam. Probably 9 out of 10 St. Augustine lawns are going to be from Floritam St. Augustine. But there are a couple other varieties, Bitter Blue, Classic, Raleigh. There are some dwarf varieties which naturally grow a little bit slower and don't get as tall, so they're not going to need to be cut quite as often. And some semi-dwarf varieties, including palmetto. Zoysia grass is a variety of turf grass that became popular several years ago. Like I mentioned, for a little bit, it was very popular. When it was first released, a lot of people thought that it used less water, less fertilizer, would need less care than the St. Augustine lawn does. It can look very attractive, but it's quite honestly very difficult to grow. For anybody who has a zoysia grass lawn, you really need to know what you're doing to make it look good and not have really bad problems with it. Some advantages of zoysia grass is it is salt tolerant. It has medium shade tolerance, but once again, it prefers full sun. It will tolerate a certain amount of shade, but won't thrive and won't look really, really good. It does have good wear tolerance. After it's grown in and spread, it is very dense grass, very uniform, and it's also tolerant of a wide range of soils and pH. Some of the disadvantages is it has problems with different nematodes. That depends on exactly what cultivar you're growing. And now there's only 2 varieties listed in this PowerPoint, but now there's a number of different varieties that are available on the market that you could buy either seed or sod of. And it has this insect pest also. It's a small weevil, which is a beetle, that's called a hunting billbug. So one thing that all lawn grasses have in common is they all have at least one insect that causes problems with them. And for zoysia grass, that's the hunting billbug. Probably the most popular and widely grown variety of zoysia is Empire. That's been popular for a number of years. But like I said, there's a number of other varieties that are just now hitting the market and becoming popular in certain areas. Zoysia is grown quite a bit in areas like the Villages and maybe some other parts of Central Florida, but not so much anymore in Hernando County. You're going to very rarely encounter it here. Here's a very nice little chart that shows all the different types of turf grasses we just covered and the region where it's going to grow best in, level of maintenance, how you would go about establishing it, whether seed is available, sod, plugs, sprigs, whatever it might be, the wear tolerance, drought tolerance, soils that it grows well in or is going to thrive in, its shade tolerance, and then whether it has commonly problems with nematodes or not. So you can see from looking at this chart, there are no perfect turf grasses. Everyone has pluses and minuses. You really have to look at the site where the lawn is going to be put in, and then figure out what is going to be the best for you individually. That's about it for part number 1 of turf grasses. We have 2 more sections coming up, So as always, if you have any questions about this video or any other videos in the course, please feel free to ask. Contact me by email, talk to me in person. Thank you very much.